Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 top tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Dr. Heather Davis is a storyteller, certified book coach, copy editor, and an author platform expert. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Salisbury University, a PhD in Molecular and Cellular Biology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and has spent over 10 years as a teacher. Heather has trained with story experts such as Cron and Jennie Nash, and surrounds herself with a brilliant community of book coaches, authors, and publishing experts. She also has a creative writing certificate from Stanford University and loves helping passionate writers make the life-changing leap from dreamer to published author. Heather is 100% committed to promoting diversity, and she works primarily with writers whose stories contribute to that goal. So let's find out more about Heather and her amazing background, what it was like to work with Lisa Cron and Jennie Nash, and crucially, of course, for you, how she can help you write your novel. Let's take a look. Well, Heather, thank you so much for joining me today. It's lovely to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And I'm going to ask you what I always ask my guests is, could you tell us something about your journey to writing and coaching and where you are now?
Yeah, so my journey to writing and coaching, I think, is the same maybe with a lot of coaches. I woke up in my 30s and realized I wasn't doing something that served my soul. You know, I had gotten distracted by life and by a career, and I wasn't in my zone of genius. So I pivoted and I was like, what I wanted to do at the time was just be a published author. I was like, I just want to write my book, right? So, you know, I started attending all the lectures and going to all the conferences and reading all the books and sort of getting back to 15-year-old me's big dream, right? And I quickly found out that I had no idea what I was doing, you know? I mean, I was really good at writing, but that was just a tiny slice of a big pie. And I was like, uh-oh, a lot has changed in 20 years. So I found Lisa Cron's books on writing, Wired for Story and Story Genius, and I quickly gobbled those up. And of course, I jumped onto her website and I found out she was a book coach, and that introduced me to the idea because I had never heard of the term book coach before. And I was like, you mean there are actually people who will help you figure out what to do? So that's how I got started. You know, I started working with her on my first book, which I just completed the first draft of. And that really got me into the idea of what it means to be a book coach, because I saw the power of it firsthand. And I had no idea how powerful it could be to have expert eyes on your story, you know?
Yeah.
And that led me to author Accelerator and Jennie Nash, who certifies book coaches. So I jumped in on that. I jumped in on that for two reasons. One, because I wanted to see my book through Lisa's eyes. You know, I'm like, how does she do this magic, right?
Yes.
And then that led me to the idea of, oh my gosh, I can really help people, you know, have this powerful revelation that I myself have had. And for me, it's life-changing. I can't even describe it. For those of us who feel passionately about writing, I think that's sort of the big goal of everything. So
yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yes, I think you're right that your story sort of does mirror
particularly myself, but other people too, who have come back to writing after doing a career in something else, and rediscovering this passion and wanting to be doing something in our creative zone of genius. Absolutely. But my goodness, what a way to start. You've started with Lisa Cron, so one of the best in this new field that we have.
Brilliant, yes.
So yeah, what a mentor to have. And then of course Jennie as well, Jennie Nash. And it's so interesting that you've said, oh my goodness, there's such a thing as a book coach, that you'd never heard of that before. And I think that we are, Jennie and Lisa are leading the way here, but I think we are part of this wonderful new burgeoning profession, and Lisa and Jennie are doing their best to really raise the bar on that and professionalize it as it's still burgeoning. I feel really privileged to be in at the beginning on this, and
so do I.
People. And I think what's interesting too is when you're coaching, then it cannot help but make your own writing better as well, as you learn from those you coach.
It's phenomenal. It's something. It is a side effect I hadn't realized, because by looking at people's work in a kind but honest way, and sort of looking for the problems that I know agents and editors are looking for as well, I can find them in my own book immediately. If I'm starting to write something, I'm not going to do that. It is this very strange thing that happens. It does make your own writing so much better, just looking at other people's work and knowing what the common problems are. And you start learning how to avoid them, in a very organic way, which is nice.
Yeah, it's lovely. So I'm curious, because each of us come to stories in our own special way. And what is it about stories that you love so much? What do they do for you?
It's funny. Most writers and book coaches, they tell us about a long history of, having had a book in their hands since they were like a year and a half or some crazy thing. But that was definitely not how it happened for me. So when I was 11, I didn't even like books. I didn't like reading. I was an outdoors girl who was just always in a tree. But at 11, my mother became seriously ill with a chronic disease that completely changed my life and my sister's life. And I remember when my mother was in the hospital, she was in the hospital for weeks when it first started. And I remember my sister, we were sitting in my grandmother's house. The lights were like very dim because my grandmother was like 85 at the time. And my sister started reading Interview with a Vampire to me. And at that moment, I was transported out of my life, which was pretty sad at that time for an 11-year-old, into this world of vampires and mystery. I had no idea the power of a story. And it was at that moment that something clicked, and I had a book in my hand at all moments, because I was like, oh, I can be elsewhere. I can live any life I want to live. And that is powerful. And that's why I love story, because reading will do that. Like, you think it's 100%, but then you write and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that was only 1%. Here's what writing can do for me. And so I quickly started writing as well. So by 15, I was writing all the time. And I actually wrote 3 books, terrible books, from the time I was 15 till the time I was 18. But yeah, so.
Are they languishing in a drawer somewhere, or have
they are right where they should be, where once in a while I pull them out and I say, oh, look at how bad this is. I love this so much.
But it's wonderful though to have that and be able to see your transformation and your growth and all the rest of it, and that the seeds were there all that time. It just you need to go and live a bit of life and then come back to it.
Yeah, and I realized with that those were my happy times, in story. And I think that's true for so many people who write. That is where our brains are the happiest, where we get those dopamine hits, where everything is just perfect. Even if the story is sad or whatever it is, we feel happy in that story.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. I think it was last year I kind of realized that writing, I was reading Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, and I'd been trying to figure out, what is it that I love about writing? What does it do for me that gives me that dopamine? And I think I realized that's my form of meditation. when I'm writing, I'm not worried about what the kids are doing or what's going on elsewhere in the world. It's just right there in the moment, that scene with that character and what's going on there. And so it's a really creative way of just switching off the outside world.
You know, it is. It really is. You know, my office is right in the middle of my living room, because I say I have two young children. That's not true anymore. They're actually quite a bit older, but I still say young children because I think of them that way. So I always wanted to not be inaccessible to them, right? I wanted to be where they could reach me. So I put my office right in the middle of everything. But that means there are always people walking through my office, like my children. And they're like, how is it we don't bother you or don't disturb you, or we can be talking to you and you don't hear us? I'm like, it's because I'm actually in another entire world. You'll have to be very deliberate if you want my attention, because
never come across that before. Yeah, I think that's a first for me, talking to someone who's deliberately put their writing space, their workspace, right in the middle of the chaos,
right in the middle of everything. It's in the chaos, and I can turn it, because when my writing starts, that's turned off.
Oh, that's commitment. I love it. I love it. So one of the things that you've differentiated between plot and between story. And I'm sure many people listening will be thinking, well, that's the same thing, isn't it? But I wonder if you could help us understand the difference between plot and between story.
Yeah, I mean, first I'll say it's semantics, right? We're getting at a bigger issue here. I mean, we could redefine the story as the plot and the plot as the story, right? Because you'll see this everywhere on the internet. But the way I'm defining them is this: the plot is everything external. It's what's happening to your character, those big dramatic things that are, you know, the explosions and the car chases and the dragons and sort of everything that if it were a movie you would see on screen. And that's why most readers think they come to story, and that's why a lot of writers, I'm not even going to say most, but a lot of writers, they think that they want to write the story because those scenes have appeared in their head, like, oh, that's so juicy, I need to write that. But the truth is, when we're reading and there's something going on underneath of that we're looking for. We're looking for a common human experience, and we're looking for some truth about what it means to be alive and what it means to be in this world. And that is story. It's the internal journey of the protagonist. It's what it all means. For instance, if you're thinking about Harry Potter, I mean, yeah, he's in the wizarding world and all of these things are happening, and he's being sorted by the sorting hat and all of this stuff. But what's really happening is he's on a journey of self-worth and trying to figure out, how do I fit in? How am I worth something? And that's really why we love that story. If you took all of those elements out, the plot itself wouldn't really interest anyone. And that's what is always buried within a really good novel. It's that internal journey. And unfortunately, that's what so many writers miss. They don't, because it's so unseen, it's so intricately woven into the narrative that it becomes invisible. And that's its power, but also that's why it's so frustrating for writers when, you know, they write an entire novel and then they submit it to an agent or a publisher and they have a form rejection because they haven't established a powerful internal journey, a very deliberate internal journey for their protagonist. Mm-hmm. And it's typically the thing, when I look at someone's book, it's typically the thing that goes missing, that journey. You know, they know that their character changes from page 1 to page 350, but it's not consistent how, and the writer isn't quite sure, and they just kind of hope that the magic happens somewhere in there. Like, so that's the difference. Plot is external and story is internal.
So wonderfully put. I love what you were saying there about this common human experience, and that's what the story is there, so that we make that connection with the character in the book and we're on that journey with them and we want to experience it with them. And it's certainly that difference and understanding how story fits into the plot has been revolutionary for me. Yeah. And when I see my students' faces as well, when we talk about it and when they realize how they are interweaving that they're interweaving that character arc with the plot line, I can see their eyes light up and suddenly things begin to make sense. But it's such a subtle shift, but a hugely powerful one, I think.
It really is. And that has happened for so many of the writers I've worked with as well. Like they were like, I had no idea I was even supposed to be doing this. Mm-hmm. And it's not that they can't do it. It's that they've never been given the tools or the understanding that it's important. Again, it's so invisible in story that they don't even realize that that's what happened. So they don't know how to emulate it until, you know, a book could very deliberately shows them, well, here's how we do it. Here are the things to look for and to be cognizant of.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but I still find myself, when it's a really skilled writer and I'm reading their book, I have to remind myself to go back and look for where they're putting in that story, because they have made it so invisible, because they've woven it in so well with plot line. I have to kind of, wait, stop a minute, let's go back a page. Have they included that character arc? And yes, they have done, but they've just done it so beautifully that I didn't notice.
Yeah, you know what? A really powerful exercise for some writers don't need this, but for writers who will argue and say, no, my favorite writer does not do this, I promise you. And I'll say, well, take a highlighter pen. I want you to go back through each page, or like just pick 5 pages and look for every place where they include thoughts, emotions, backstories. Just highlight those, and you'll notice you've probably highlighted at least a third, maybe more of the page. It's kind of powerful when you see how subtly a writer will do it. And it's not always something that's so, it can be really invisible, because it's like shifting the camera angle to, instead of from above anyone's perspective, they just shift it so subtly to exactly one person's perspective. And that is powerful. They give the protagonist take on the world. Like I was reading Billy Summers by Stephen King. So I'm a big Stephen King fan, because I don't love horror. Actually, it's not my favorite, but he's a masterful storyteller. And in the story, there was a woman walking down the hallway, and Billy was thinking, I'm paraphrasing here, Billy was thinking those click-clack shoes again, but he didn't think high heels. He thought click-clack shoes. So it's little things that are going to just give you the character's take on the world. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to say, I'm not a big fan of high heel shoes, I think they're this or that. He's saying, there's click-clack shoes again. Giving me a headache. It's just this little subtle shift. I'm like, he did it again. I love that.
Great example there. Great example. Now, one of the things that if we're looking around the internet or we're looking at craft books, one of the things we often see is you've got to show, not tell. And this is a real conundrum for so many writers. And it feels like a fine line between showing and telling. We want to convey a clear idea to our reader, but how do you do that if you're not telling them? But I know that you have some thoughts on this idea of show, don't tell, and perhaps where we're misinterpreting what the advice is.
Yeah, I think this advice is often misunderstood because the people who are writing about it in some cases have misunderstood it. So it's this perpetuating misunderstanding through writing. So show don't tell is often interpreted like this. Instead of telling us, your main character Jane is sad, you want to show us that she's crying. But what happens is we shift from narration, Jane is sad, to an external video camera, Jane is crying. And then we miss the internal journey of Jane herself. So for instance, if I were to write a scene about a husband and wife, a husband walks in with flowers and says, "Happy birthday, honey," and his wife slams down her phone and storms out of the room. If we just saw that, we might say, oh, well, he must have been late telling her happy birthday, or maybe he didn't get her what she wanted. So we have no idea why she's mad. We have no idea. So the external video camera, it's nice, and we need that. We need to know what externally happened. But then the writer also needs to provide internally, why is Jane slamming the phone down? Why is she storming out of the room? Well, maybe she had told her husband many years before, please, over and over again, please don't celebrate my birthday. This is the anniversary of the day my dad died. And I don't want to think about this. So we need to know very specifically why Jane is upset. Or if you're in her husband's head, we need to know why he thinks she is upset. He doesn't have to be right. He just has to, from his perspective of all the things that have happened, he has to make a guess so that the reader is included. So I guess for me, show don't tell is really show and tell. You need to show what's happening and then tell us why it has meaning, why the characters are feeling what they're feeling, bring in backstory, bring in perspective, because your characters do not arrive on the first page never having lived a life. They bring with them backstory. They bring with them meaning. And, just when we ourselves walk into a room, we bring with us, I'm 43. I bring with me 43 years worth of experience of why I'm in this room and how I got there and why I perceive it the way I do, right?
Yeah.
So we need to let our characters do that. They need to make meaning on the page so the reader really gets it. And that is what engages a reader. Mm-hmm. Setting up expectation.
Yeah, I love that simple switch from not show, don't tell, but to show and tell. Yeah. And making sure that whatever they do has meaning, and we kind of give that meaning to the reader in the life experience they bring with us. And this is something Lisa Cron does so well in explaining and encouraging us to do.
For sure. She's the queen of put it on the page. And I have, so many times she'll say, if you don't put it on the page, the reader does not know. They cannot guess, because this is not any person that you're writing about. This is a very specific person. And if you're doing it well, you should not, every single thing on the page directly relates to their story specific background and everything they've brought with them up to that moment. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of a powerful thought.
It is. And I think clarify just makes it simpler for us. Rather than trying to be clever with our writing, it's just to kind of put it on the page. I say that a lot to my students, and I end up saying it a lot, and I can see the confusion in their face or even the frustration, because particularly for those who are writing slightly more literary work, they say to me, "But Emma, I want to leave a little bit of intrigue there. I want to let the reader make up their own mind and come to their own conclusions about it." Did people say that to you, and what's your response?
Oh my gosh, all the time. There are two parts. They want, first of all, from a thematic theme, point, they want the writer to come to their own conclusions, and I'm going to answer that one first. I often think that comes from a place of the writer doesn't necessarily know exactly a specific thing that they are trying to say. They're trying to say so many things that they haven't put it down in a way that they themselves understand it. Mm-hmm. And if they don't understand it, the reader surely never will. The writer certainly never wants to beat the reader over the head with that big point, right? But it has to be there. The writer has to have distilled it in their head so clearly that it just permeates every page of what they write, so that you never have to say it outright as far as, well, this story is supposed to prove that, right? We're never going to say that, but it has to be there. It has to emotionally prove it to the reader as they're going. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's the first part. Like, the reader has to be crystal clear.
Yeah, and I find that it's harder with to pin that down with those more kind of when there is big emotions going on. It's not the action stories, but it is those emotional, psychological stories where the characters are having complicated emotions, and so it can be a real battle for the writer to figure out, okay, well, how do I articulate those mixed emotions that the character is feeling?
Well, yeah, and I think that it can be very powerful, though, because just by narrowing down to what is my argument with this book? What am I trying to say about the human experience? By distilling that down, a writer doesn't have to exclude anything, but it allows them just to focus in on making sure that the scenes they choose to put on the page are directly related to that arc of change. And it becomes a great litmus test for what belongs in the book and what doesn't. I was recently working with a writer who, she had this wonderful and very delightful lunch scene between her protagonist and all of the protagonist's friends. And, you know, she was like, I love this scene. And I'm like, but what is this scene offering to the story? What does it bring to your character's arc or the arc of change in the novel? She's like, I don't know. I just wanted this clever banter in here because people have lunch, right? I mean, therefore I should be able to include a lunch scene. Like, well, not exactly. You want every scene in your book to relate to the story you're telling. And by the story you're telling, I don't necessarily just mean the plot you're telling. I'm talking about that internal journey. So does this lunch scene relate to her, your protagonist's internal arc of change? If so, it belongs. If not, we need to pull it out or figure out how we can put something more in. Mm-hmm. It's sort of that, it's the litmus test. Does it belong? And it can help with a bloated book. You can start pulling things out that don't fit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's that has been a revelation to me, certainly in my writing life, is does the scene serve a purpose? It might be funny and witty and have all that repartee going on, but does it serve a purpose to the greater book? Does it deserve its place to be in there? And it's heartbreaking when you have to own up and say, no, it doesn't.
I have a graveyard for all scenes I've pulled out of my book and my work with Lisa. And, I mean, it really is, because I'll go there and I'll mourn the lost dialogue and the lost everything. I'll be like, rest in peace scenes. I love you. Yes. So, I mean, it is about killing your darlings, as they say, but for the greater good. Mm-hmm. You're making your story stronger by recognizing what your story is. Mm-hmm. and serving that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to speak to the other thing that you're saying about writers hiding things from the reader, because this is so prevalent. The clever deception of, I'm going to reveal this on page 170, and writers will hide some pivotal information. So I was recently reading the opening chapter of a novel for a writer, and I could not tell what was happening. I had this, there was a woman in there and things were happening. And it turns out one of the things she was trying to hide is that this protagonist is actually a 5-year-old trapped in a woman's body. It does not read like that. That's a really pivotal piece of information that the reader has no idea what's happening. These are things that have to be conveyed to the reader right up front. Or there was a writer who was trying to hide the fact that his, that there was a suicide attempt from the protagonist, but you're in the protagonist's head. You cannot hide that from the reader. So these are all things that the writer think, oh, this will be so juicy if later I reveal this. But the truth is, if you hide things from the reader, the reader's never going to make it to page 175. They're going to get frustrated, bored, disengaged, and put the novel down and say, I have no idea what was even happening there.
Yes, that is such a good, valid point. And that's certainly a conversation I've had with a number of my students as well. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, no problem.
So when I speak to people about their writing, and I work with new writers, people who are writing their first novel, time management is always a big thing, but as is, being accountable and staying on track with their writing.
Yeah.
What are some of the suggestions that you can make to help writers stay accountable to themselves?
So I think scheduling a time to write that is consistent for you. And there, there's lots of advice out there to write every day. Mm-hmm. Maybe that will work for some people, but I know that isn't going to work for everyone. That doesn't even work for me. I have a very busy schedule, but consistently, like, well, when are you most productive? When is your mind on best? Carve out that time, make that time sacred. For me, that Saturday morning and Sunday morning, I can knock out 30 or 40 pages in a good Saturday or Sunday morning when everyone else is asleep. But Monday evening after a long day at work, I'm not going to write my best work then. So it's about knowing yourself and making a plan for when your brain is most creative and sitting down and just saying, I'm not going to do anything else but write. And you might not always be inspired, but being consistent will help you be more consistently inspired, I think.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely agree. It's one of the things that I recommend people do is to schedule the time in. You know, we schedule everything else, our work, the dentist, dinner, everything is scheduled. We know when it's going to happen. And so particularly when you're starting out and you're still building that writing muscle, still trying to figure out this process called writing a book, schedule it in so it becomes part of your weekly routine, and you can as I say, build that writing muscle. So I 100% agree. You don't necessarily need to do it for forever, because once it becomes part of your life, then you naturally show up. But in those early days, I think it's essential.
For sure. And procrastination is insidious. And I say this as a person who most people would not consider a procrastinator. But so there's a TED Talk, and I cannot think of the gentleman's name who wrote it. I mean, who gave it right now. But it's a TED Talk on procrastination. And he talks about the idea. It's one of my favorites, and it's hilarious. And I would definitely suggest everyone go listen to it. But he talks about the difference between the kind of procrastination that is sort of visible and the invisible kind. The visible kind, procrastination is self-limiting if we have a deadline, right? So if we have a deadline at work, we might procrastinate on that big report until about 2 or 3 days before it's due, but then we're going to get in gear and we're going to get it done because our reputation is on the line, right? Or any other thing that has a deadline, we're going to get it done. But the things for ourselves, the things that are most important to us, like writing that book, if that is your life goal, and for many writers, they would say that if at the end of my life I didn't write and publish a book, a big piece would have been missing from the life I wanted to lead. That's when it becomes insidious, because there's no real deadline. You can just say tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow, or I know I got distracted this week, but I'll do it next week. And then the weeks fly by. And that is why I hired a book coach. That is why I hired Lisa Cron. I was like, if I have a deadline, I'm going to show up and do the work. And I knew, even as much as I loved writing, as committed as I was, even right now, if I didn't work with Lisa, I would say, I'll do it next week. I'll finish that second draft eventually. But, she's waiting there at the certain date. And, I don't want to, I'm not going to disappoint. I'm not going to not provide the thing I said I'd provide. So I'm going to do the writing.
Yeah.
So accountability partners are also important.
Yes, especially if you're kind of paying someone to be there as well, then you want to know that you're going to make the most of that investment that you've made in yourself.
It's so true. And, a lot of people have asked me, well, it's a huge monetary investment. Like it is, but to me, it's worth it. And then 100 times more. If, I cannot speak highly enough of the process of book coaching, because writing can be so solitary. And I'm an introvert, so I can do solitary, but still, it's so solitary, and you love your characters so much that it's hard to sit there and think it could be years before anyone experiences them. But when you have a book coach, you actually have someone who grows to love your characters as much as you do. And you have a prescribed time to sit down and talk about your work, which is so fun. I mean, aside from being so helpful, right? It will get you on track. It will keep you on track. You have expert eyes. You have a cheerleader, but you also have someone to nerd out with about your characters. It's like you're already a best-selling author. Like I can't.
You have someone to nerd out with. I love
it's
that.
so true. It's so fun. I look forward to my sessions so much because she knows my characters. She loves them. She remembers all their past. She informs me. She's like, no, that doesn't sound like your character at all. You need to rewrite this part. And I'm like, oh, you're right.
Actually, that is such a good point. One of the things I love about working with my coach is sometimes I think she knows my characters in my book better than I do.
Yeah.
Because she has that distance from it. She's not so in the weeds with it. And so I look at her sometimes, I'm like, how do you remember that? How do you know that? And I don't.
It's so true. There are times, that Lisa has looked at my work. She's like, this doesn't sound right. He comes off this way and he would never say this. And one part of my mind is like, well, I created him. Wouldn't I know what he was saying? And then like 10 minutes later, I'm like, oh my God, she's right. He would never say that. So.
And this is why coaches also need coaches.
Yeah. I mean, even every book coach I know has a book coach, because we know the power of the process. Like Lisa has a book coach, Jennie has a book coach, everyone has a book coach, because you need eyes that aren't yours. You cannot clearly see all the problems with your work. You can see some of them for sure. Like being a book coach, I can avoid the huge pitfalls, I can avoid the obvious stuff, but the subtle and insidious stuff that can, wreak havoc on your work, that is stuff that really takes someone who's not you, because you're too in it, you're in the weeds, and they're looking from the top. Mm-hmm. And you cannot take on a perspective of not having written it. Mm-hmm. You really can't. You did write it. You did come up with it. So you can never have those completely pristine eyes.
Yeah. And I feel too as well that working with a coach on this, it's almost like having a therapist in a way.
Oh my
God. Because our stories are so related to our own lives and our own experiences, the coaching extends beyond the book. Yeah. I've seen it ripple into other areas of my life, and even if it's just, if we wanted to just stick with the writing for the moment, that belief that, gosh, do you know what, I have got something here, that maybe I do have a talent here, this is worth pursuing, and that self-belief begins to build as well as the craft side does.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, there's so many layers to what you just said. It is kind of a form of therapy, because often we bring characters to the page that are in one way or another a reflection of ourselves, even if it's not obvious when you look. Like, you might have enormous differences between you and your protagonist, but there is a reflection of you and your belief in the world and the things that you're personally struggling with on that page. And to work through that with a coach and to have them offer advice and kind of see clearly what's happening, it is powerful. And as a writer grows in their ability to write, the confidence, like I am working with a gentleman who is 71 years old, and he's like, this is what I want to do. I'm 71 and I've realized that, this is what I want to do. And his confidence, he came to me thinking, maybe I can write a book. I don't know. I really want to. And now he's like, oh, heck yes, I can do this. I'm going to do this. In fact, I'm not just going to write one book. I've got 3 planned already. And the happiness that it provides, just the process, mm-hmm. I can't describe it. I know how it feels personally because I have that happiness working with a book coach, mm-hmm. but seeing it reflected from my clients, it's pretty profound to see.
Magical.
Yeah, it is magical. It's fantastic.
Oh my goodness, time has gone so quickly. I've been really taken up with what we've been saying, but I do need to stay on track with our time, and I don't want to miss out on asking you about first of all, your writing. You've mentioned that you're writing your first novel, so I'd love to hear what you can tell us about that. And then, of course, I would also love to learn more about your coaching and how you help writers write their first, second, third books. I'm not sure who you focus on, so share with us.
Yeah, so my own book, it is a dystopian fantasy, and like I said, I just got done with the first draft, and it's been just a revolutionary process for me to see how long it takes to write a good book. And I say a good book with confidence because I know it's good, because I work with Lisa Cron, and I know she doesn't let anything that's not good get written. She will send you back to the drawing board so many times. She'll be like, no, try again.
So how long have you been working with her?
I've been working with her for 2 years.
2 years.
2 years. And there's always such a rush, I think. Well, we need to write a book in a month, right? NaNoWriMo. No, we don't. You cannot possibly, in my opinion, write a phenomenal book in a tiny amount of time. Now, does that mean it would take everybody 2 years to get a first draft? Maybe not. That's what it takes me, because I'm writing a fantasy story. I have a lot of world building and it's the first book of a series. So there's a lot that goes into this, but I'm also kind of not in a rush, and I'm happy with the pace because I'm enjoying this journey so much. Oh my God. So yeah, I just finished the first draft, and now I'm going
That's a
back to
big
start.
moment, isn't it?
It's
Finishing that.
so,
I mean,
I cried.
congratulations. Yeah, it's
Thank
huge.
you.
Yeah.
You know, it was strange because I hadn't done that. Like I said, I wrote 3 really bad books when I was between the years of 15 and 18. And they were the thing is, I think you do have to write really bad books before you can ever hope to write a really good book, because you have to learn how to write. And I think that is something that is missed. It takes a while to learn that craft.
Mhm.
And that's just the paint on the walls. Pretty writing is the paint on the walls. It's all the structural stuff underneath that actually supports the story. And that's the really hard part.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
And
that's
yeah, wonderful. And so how are you kind of taking all the things that you've been learning through Lisa, through Author Accelerator, and transferring that into helping other new writers?
so because of where I came to the process of book coaching, having in desperation to write my first novel, found Lisa, and I believe that she saved me. I also serve aspiring authors, so authors who have never been published or never been traditionally published. And there are usually some fundamental gaps in their understanding. They are great writers, but that doesn't mean there's not work to do, and there's not lessons to learn, and things to become aware of and practice. So it's that sort of writer that really speaks to me. And yeah, it's just incredibly fun to work with people who are very, very open to doing to learning a new process, to thinking in new ways, like show don't tell is really show and tell. So these, I think, are, I'm not going to say more easily taught to first time writers, but I would definitely say it's easier for them to understand that there's some work to do there, and that there's something they don't understand.
Yeah, and they're keen and eager and know that they've got lots to learn and want to learn as well.
They are so eager, and I love it. They drink up all that you offer, and they implement it, and they work so hard, because most of the time these are people my age or older, and it's really important. They've realized that time has gotten away, and if not now, when?
Yeah.
Now's the time to get started and to do it well. So
yeah.
They're very motivated.
And in your bio, you said that you're very committed to promoting diversity, and you like working on stories that encompass that. Can you speak into that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. So the people that I work with most are people who are writing about protagonists from marginalized backgrounds, communities, and typically, not always, typically the writer themselves is also a part of that group. So whether it be, a person who has autism, or someone who's in the LGBTQIA plus community, these are the stories that have traditionally not been told. Everybody, and there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with a book from a person who is neurotypical and straight and white, and all of those things are fine, but we have a lot of those books in the world already. But we don't have a lot of books about a person with autism, or a person who a man who was an LGBTQIA plus youth in the 1960s in Georgia. We don't have that book yet. And those are the books that I want to help bring into the world, because those stories need to be told, especially in a world right now where we need to learn to understand each other more. I had a writer recently, we were talking, and she said something very profound. She said, writing is an act of empathy. And it is, and so is reading. And we need that empathy. So we need these stories of diverse protagonists that will help us take an internal journey and be someone new at the end ourselves, and learn something powerful.
That's beautiful. Yes. 100%. Yeah, lovely. Oh, Heather, that's been amazing. Thank you. I could talk to you all day.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.
Well, before we say goodbye, please do tell listeners where they can find out more about you and your coaching.
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about me and my coaching, I'm at thecreativeauthorpreneur.com. And you can go there and you can read all about the services I offer. So I do month-to-month coaching, and I love working with aspiring authors who are sort of down in the weeds and a little bit, desperate and need to find someone. I definitely am looking to work with people again who are writing about diverse protagonists. Also, I love speculative fiction. So those are my two those are my two things.
Fantastic. Well, I will be sure to link to thecreativeauthorpreneur.com in the show notes. So Heather,
yeah, and I have a great freebie for people if they want to come to my website. It's a chapter checklist that they can see is their first chapter, spot on. Do they have the right stuff in it? So they should definitely stop by for that freebie, if nothing else.
Oh, they should do. Absolutely. I know that is something that burns in people's brains.
It is, because chapter one is so pivotal, because if you don't like chapter one, you're never making it to chapter 2.
Brilliant. Heather, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
If you're a first-time novelist who is struggling to either finish your novel or get those revisions to where you want them to be, then I've got just the thing for you. I have a small group coaching program which runs over 12 months, and over the course of that program I will help you fix those plot problems that you've been struggling with. I'll help you get under the surface of your characters so you really get to know them and what's driving them. And crucially for you, I give you that self-belief that you need to get you through the roller coaster that is writing a novel, so that you can carry on, get to the end, and get your book, your story out into the world so it can change people's lives. If that sounds good to you, if that is something that you'd be interested in doing, I know I can help you get to where you want to be. So book a call with me. Let's have a chat and see if we are a good fit for each other. If you're interested in doing that, then go to emmadesi.com/story builder. I look forward to chatting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers. Hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.